Hey, welcome back to the Spector Creative channel, and if you're on this channel for the first time or the 200th time, you're probably here because you like collecting action figures. And we all have different ways of collecting figures. Some of us like to collect the same character over and over again. Sorry, Chris, to use that image again. I know you're not just a Batman fan. And some of us collect by scale, like 6-inch. I love collecting 6-inch Marvel Legends, especially kind of the 92-ish X-Men era. Still waiting for that Feral figure. But I also love collecting 3 3/4, specifically Star Wars figures. It's what I grew up with as a kid, and as an adult I feel empowered to be able to collect all the figures I could never have as a child. Now, I don't have room to display all of my figures all over the place, so they tend to pop up in my office here and there in odds and end places, simply because I just don't have a shelf big enough to handle the thousands of 3 3/4 Classic Trilogy figures. I have my bin of my new figures that have come out, and I have my bin of my everyday figures that I can grab and go without having to dig into my collection. My end goal would be to get all of the figures that were released by Kenner back in the day in the modern line. So, while I slowly build this up and display figures wherever I can, there are some Prequel and Disney Plus figures I get. You can see Wat Tambor there, and there's the Mandalorian right front and center in this display I have of my very favorite Star Wars 3 3/4 figures. So, while I am definitely an original trilogy purist, I kind of hit a snag when Power of the Jedi came out. This was a line that combined, for the first time, prequel figures, Episode 1, with Classic Trilogy. And while there were some sort of prequel concept figures thrown in, it was the Classic Trilogy figures that were my bread and butter that I was going after, for the most part ignoring the prequel figures. But some of them presented a challenge. For example, this R2-D2. R2-D2 is a Classic Trilogy figure, and previously all of the R2-D2s were clearly from the Classic Trilogy, based on the release, based on the accessories, etc., etc. So when this R2 fit came out, the idea was, well, is that a Classic Trilogy R2 or a Prequel R2? And I suppose the easy answer would be that the deco informs the collector that this is absolutely a Prequel R2. R2 never has those burn marks during Episode 4, 5, and 6, but he does get them during Episode 1. So this R2-D2 falls into the Prequel category. But as the prequels continued and more characters are introduced from the original trilogy that also appeared in the prequels, as a Classic Trilogy purist, it becomes more and more challenging to figure out, okay, well, does this figure represent just the character, or is it a specific movie version? So a good example is the Royal Guard, right? So the Royal Guard, most of us who grew up in the 80s remember from Return of the Jedi, but of course also appeared in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So when this figure came out in the Gold Saga series, well, the question is, are we looking at a Classic Trilogy figure or a prequel figure? Now, of course, the lightning effect that comes with him kind of makes it a prequel figure, since he never shot lightning like that in the classic movies. But can a prequel figure become a classic figure? It's interesting. So there was a release of the Shuttle Tidarian in the line. Tidarian? Not that one, this one. The one that was Target exclusive from the Saga collection. And it had 2 pack-in figures, one of them being said Imperial Guard. So while you did get, of course, a really cool pack-in in the form of an Imperial shuttle, for me as a figure collector, this was what I was interested in. So both figures are Classic Trilogy, Darth Vader and Imperial Guard. So the Darth Vader was originally released as clearly a Classic Trilogy figure, and while we would get better versions of the Imperial Guard as time went by, the version packed in with the shuttle was the Episode 2 version, but here being represented as an Episode 6 version. All right, let's look at another example. One of my absolute favorite figures from all of Star Wars is the Tuscan Raider. And while I was very disappointed in the original Power of the Force 2 version because it was staring at his feet, we would eventually get one of the cooler versions that came with a bantha as an accessory. Yes, I always consider the beast an accessory with the figures. What can I say? So while Tuscan Raiders were introduced or reintroduced into the prequels, and while they looked very similar to the versions from Episode 4, such as Ig, Ook, and Ak from the famous, battling Luke scene, this Power of the Jedi release, again, like that R2-D2, was decoed in Episode 2 colors and outfit. Now, obviously, we got more and more Tuscan Raiders over time, including finally a sort of vintage collection version that gave him those articulated elbows that we longed for after that saga release. The version that was released in Power of the Jedi got a re-release as a Classic Trilogy figure, much like that Royal Guard, first released as a prequel figure, and then later redecoed the same tool, now released as a Classic Trilogy figure. So which one is Classic Trilogy? Are they both? Is just the redecoed version a Classic Trilogy figure and the original a prequel? You could see the quandary. Darth Vader also represents a very unique issue with this type of collecting. Darth Vader is traditionally an Episode 4, 5, and 6 character, but now thanks to Obi-Wan and Rogue One and the prequels, well, Darth Vader is no longer instantly said to be a Episode 4, 5, 6 figure. I mean, this is clearly an Episode 6 version because, well, it's also a pre-special editions version because he still has his eyebrows there. And as the prequels continued, again, there would be Darth Vader's released with Anakin Skywalker's as accessories to this Classic Trilogy figure. And there are differences in Darth Vader outfits between films. And some of them are very minor, based on the way the helmet is done, where the deco is put. Some of them are a little bit more major, such as where the armor is, how it fits either over or under the cloth aspects of his robes. Don't get me started on when I had to stand up at Lucasfilm in front of 400 people and ask them which version of Darth Vader would be in Rogue One and whether or not we could repaint our existing Jax Big Fig for Rogue One. That's a whole other YouTube video. So as more and more Darth Vaders are released in prequel packaging, the question continues to be, okay, well, is the Darth Vader figure a prequel figure or a Classic Trilogy figure? Could a Classic Trilogy figure be packed in with prequel figures? Well, in that Evolution set, it clearly was. But other times, you're clearly getting a Darth Vader from one of the earlier releases. A really interesting example is the various maskless Darth Vaders. While most of them are clearly modeled after Return of the Jedi, when Vader removes his mask cinematically for the first time. I mean, I suppose now in Rebels and in Obi-Wan this has happened. But this particular release, this is an interesting removable helmet Vader, because that's not Sebastian Shaw. So this is from the commemorative tin collection, clearly released as a Episode 4 set. It says Episode 4 right there on packaging, and all the other figures, the Sand Trooper, the Leia, and the C-3PO are all from A New Hope. But the Vader figure, it's packed with a set that has a removable helmet. It's just a new head, it's an existing body. Well, that's Hayden Christensen under the mask, not Sebastian Shaw. I guess this is what Vader would have looked like during A New Hope had his mask been removed, so Vader's not as old as he was in Return of the Jedi. But Hayden Christensen's face being under there, to me, that's really interesting. Is this truly an Episode 4 figure, since he never takes off his helmet, but if he did, he would have a prequel face underneath? Boggles the mind. It makes like your head explode, trying to figure out if this is truly an Episode 4 set, an Episode 6 set, and as these commemorative tins continue to ship, which blended these interesting elements between the movies, well, it becomes more and more difficult. So, if you have rules like I do and you strictly collect Classic Trilogy figures, how do you adapt to this? When figures from prequels come out, do you consider them Classic Trilogy? Do you consider them Prequel Trilogy? I'd love to know in the comment section. And please do share this video with others. It's the best way to show support for this channel. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your own challenges with collecting Star Wars figures and how you classify them. We all make our rules, and sometimes you have to break them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.